Hello everyone. For men, sex is not only about the body. It is about how they feel seen, how they feel valued, and how they feel loved. Tonight, I want to take you into that hidden world. When we talk about relationships, one of the most powerful yet misunderstood aspects is how men view sex with the person they are with. Too often, the conversation reduces intimacy to something purely physical. But in reality, it is layered with meaning, emotion, and unspoken needs. For many men, sex is not just about physical release. It is about validation, connection, and feeling wanted. It's a moment where he feels admired, respected, and accepted for who he is. Beyond the surface, sex becomes a language of love, even when he may not put it into words. Of course, physical attraction often sparks desire. But as time passes, it is not only about looks. What matters is the emotional bond, the trust, the respect, and the sense of closeness. When a man feels that bond, intimacy transforms from a simple act into something sacred. Still, it's important to understand that men differ. Some separate sex from love, seeking physical satisfaction without attachment. Others can only truly enjoy sex when it flows from emotional closeness. But across the board, one truth stands: sex has a direct impact on a man's sense of self-worth. Rejection in this area can feel personal, even when it's not intended that way. Sometimes men use sex as a form of stress relief, a way to escape pressure. At other times, it is an act of loyalty, an unspoken promise that says, "You are the one I choose." But in every case, one thing remains. Men want to feel desired, not tolerated, not accepted out of duty, but truly desired. So, how do men view sex with you? It is not just a physical experience. It is a mirror reflecting how he feels in the relationship. It is his way of expressing love, trust, vulnerability, and connection. At the deepest level, sex for a man is more than pleasure. It is an unspoken question. Do you want me? Do you accept me? Do I matter to you? And when that answer is yes, intimacy becomes more than just an act. It becomes a bond that strengthens everything else. When we think about how men view sex, the most common assumption is that it's purely physical. And yes, there's no denying that men are strongly driven by physical attraction. The chemistry, the desire, the thrill of touch. But to stop there is to miss the bigger picture. For many men, sex is not just a bodily act. It's an experience that blends physical satisfaction with deeper emotional meaning. It becomes a bridge between how they feel inside and how they connect with someone they care about. Sex often serves as a way for men to express emotions that they may not always verbalize. Society has conditioned many men to be strong, composed, and guarded with their feelings, which means they might not openly say, "I feel vulnerable," or "I need closeness." Instead, sex becomes their language, their way of showing affection, trust, and love. Through physical intimacy, they feel understood without needing to explain, validated without needing to justify, and emotionally bonded without needing to struggle for the right words. At the same time, sex gives men a sense of reassurance. It tells them, "I am wanted, I am enough, I am valued." This is why for many men, sex is tied to their confidence and self-worth. It's not just about release, it's about recognition. And when that recognition is given freely with desire and enthusiasm, the experience transcends mere pleasure and turns into something much more meaningful. Something that lingers beyond the physical act and touches the emotional core of who they are. And this dual nature, physical on one hand, emotional on the other, is what makes men's view of sex so layered. Because on the surface it may appear as simple desire, but underneath, for many men, intimacy is far more than a physical interaction. It is one of the clearest pathways to feeling truly connected to someone. Unlike casual conversations or shared activities, intimacy creates a closeness that words often cannot reach. In those moments, a man is not only giving of his body, but also seeking a response that reassures him. You see me, you accept me, you want me here. This sense of connection is powerful because it bridges gaps that everyday life sometimes creates. A man may work tirelessly, face pressures, carry burdens silently, and still struggle to communicate what weighs on his mind. Yet through intimacy, he feels a form of understanding that requires no explanation. It is as if the closeness says what he cannot: I need you, I need to feel that I matter, I need to know that I am enough. Validation plays a huge role here. When a man is intimate with someone who genuinely desires him, it reinforces his sense of worth. It tells him that he is still attractive, still valued, still important in ways beyond his responsibilities or achievements. That validation goes deeper than ego. It touches the human need to belong, to be wanted not just for what he provides, but for who he is in his most vulnerable state. And this is why intimacy can feel like a lifeline. When a man feels connected during those moments, it strengthens trust, deepens loyalty, and creates a bond that goes far beyond the physical. He walks away not just satisfied but reassured that his place in the relationship is secure, that his presence matters, that his role as a partner is not invisible. For him, sex is not simply pleasure, it is proof. Proof that he is desired, proof that he belongs, proof that he is still enough. And when that connection is missing, when intimacy feels empty, transactional, or forced, it often leaves a man feeling not only rejected but disconnected, as though an invisible wall has risen between him and the one he cares for. Because at the core, for many men, physical attraction is often the spark that lights the fire. It's the first thing that draws their attention. The way someone looks carries themselves, the energy they radiate. The physical side is undeniable because it's immediate, visible, and instinctive. It's not something that has to be explained. It's felt instantly, almost like a magnetic pull that says, I want to be close to this person. And in the beginning, that attraction can be strong enough to drive desire on its own. But what truly separates fleeting interest from lasting passion is not just what the eyes see, it's what the heart feels. A man may be drawn by beauty, but it is the emotional bond that keeps the desire alive and growing. Over time, surface-level attraction can fade, yet emotional connection transforms physical desire into something much more powerful. When a man feels understood, respected, and emotionally safe with someone, intimacy becomes layered. It's not just about touching the body, it's about reaching the soul. This is why many men, even those who seem driven by appearances, often speak about a different kind of beauty. One that shows up in laughter, in shared moments, in loyalty, in the way a partner makes them feel seen. That emotional presence adds depth to physical attraction, making intimacy richer, more meaningful, and harder to replace. Because physical beauty might catch his eye, but emotional connection captures his spirit, deepens his desire, and makes him want to keep returning, not just for pleasure, but for closeness. And the more that bond strengthens, the more the lines between physical desire and emotional intimacy blur. It no longer feels like two separate things, one feeding the other, each making the experience more complete. Physical attraction creates the doorway, but emotional connection is what keeps him inside, keeps him invested, keeps him choosing to return again and again. Because for many men, when it comes to intimacy, one of the most fascinating things to understand is that not all men experience love and sex in the same way. For some, the two are deeply intertwined. Sex is only meaningful when love is present. To them, intimacy is a sacred extension of their emotions, a physical way to express what words often cannot. In this view, sex is not casual, it's not mechanical. It's an act of devotion, something they share only when their heart is fully invested. But for others, sex and love can exist separately. They may see sex as a form of physical satisfaction, a biological urge, or even just an enjoyable experience without any need for deep emotional attachment. In this case, sex is viewed more as an activity than an expression of the heart. These men may be able to share physical closeness without necessarily sharing emotional vulnerability. Neither perspective is inherently right or wrong. Rather, it reflects the complexity of human desire. What's important to recognize is that even those who separate love from sex often feel a deeper impact when both are present together. Because while physical satisfaction can be achieved in many ways, the emotional bond adds a layer of fulfillment that cannot be replicated. Love gives sex purpose. It transforms an act into an experience, a moment into a memory, and pleasure into connection. And for the men who need love to feel intimacy at its fullest, the distinction is even sharper. Without emotional closeness, the act feels incomplete, as though something vital is missing. For them, love fuels desire, intensifies attraction, and makes intimacy not just a choice but a need to merge their emotions with their physical expression. This divide between those who separate and those who connect shapes the way men experience relationships. It influences how they approach closeness, how they define commitment, how they interpret loyalty. And the truth is, even the men who claim they can separate the two often find that over time. For many men, respect and admiration are not just nice extras in a relationship. They are the foundation upon which everything else, including sex, rests. A man can experience physical pleasure without respect, but he cannot experience true fulfillment. Because when intimacy is paired with admiration, it shifts the entire experience from being something temporary to something deeply affirming. Respect tells a man that he is valued not just for what he does, but for who he is. It says, "I see your efforts. I recognize your strength. I acknowledge your presence." And when that message is present in a relationship, sex becomes more than just a physical act. It becomes a celebration of his identity. Admiration magnifies this even further. When a man feels admired, when he senses that his partner looks at him with pride, with desire, with appreciation, it elevates intimacy into a space where he doesn't just feel wanted, he feels worthy. This is why men often place such importance on respect. For them, it is not about ego in the shallow sense, but about dignity in the deepest sense. Without respect, sex can feel empty, even degrading. But when admiration is present, every touch carries a message. I see you. I believe in you. I choose you. And that transforms the way he experiences intimacy, because now it is not only his body being engaged, but his spirit being affirmed. It's also worth noting that admiration does not always come through grand gestures. It often reveals itself in the smallest details. The way someone looks at him, the tone of voice used when speaking to him, the willingness to trust his leadership or appreciate his efforts. These subtle signals feed into his sense of worth, and when carried into the bedroom, they make him feel not just desired but deeply respected. And this is why, for many men, sex without respect feels hollow, no matter how passionate it might appear on the surface. Because admiration is the fuel that keeps desire burning. It's what makes a man not only want intimacy, but crave it with the person who makes him feel valued. And the stronger that respect and admiration grow outside of the bedroom, the more powerful the connection becomes within it, creating a cycle that deepens closeness over time, reinforcing again and again that intimacy is not just about bodies. It's about, for many men, sex is not just an act of pleasure, it is intertwined with how they see themselves, with their sense of worth, their identity, and their confidence. In those moments of intimacy, a man often feels more than physical closeness, he feels affirmed. It is as if the experience whispers back to him, "You are strong enough, you are wanted, you are desirable, you are enough." And that affirmation goes far beyond the bedroom, reaching into how he carries himself in every other area of life. When a man feels desired by his partner, it boosts his confidence in a way that is difficult to replicate elsewhere. He may receive respect at work, admiration from friends, or recognition from society, but nothing strikes as deeply as the affirmation that comes from intimacy. Because in that vulnerable space, stripped of roles, titles, and achievements, he is not being validated for what he produces, but for who he is. And when that validation is freely given, it builds him up, reinforces his masculinity, and strengthens his belief in himself. On the other hand, when intimacy is absent or feels one-sided, many men experience a sharp decline in confidence. They may begin to question not just their attractiveness, but their value as a partner, their ability to satisfy, their significance in the relationship. And these doubts don't remain confined to the private sphere. They spill into the way he approaches the world, the way he engages with others, the way he views his own capability. This is why sex, for many men, is not simply about desire. It is about reassurance. Reassurance that they are seen, chosen, and wanted. Every moment of intimacy can feel like a mirror reflecting back his worth. When that reflection is positive, it empowers him. When it is absent, distorted, or withheld, it can erode his confidence in ways that are difficult to articulate. And so, the link between sex and self-worth runs deep. It's not that men measure their entire identity by intimacy, but that intimacy carries a weight unlike anything else. It has the power to either build up or tear down, to inspire strength or to trigger doubt. And because men are often less vocal about these emotional needs, the connection between sex and confidence becomes an unspoken truth, a quiet reality that reveals itself not in words, but in how he behaves, how he carries himself, how he approaches the relationship. Which is why when a man feels truly wanted, not tolerated but desired, not accepted out of duty but pursued with passion, his confidence rises, not just in the bedroom but in life. And when he does not feel that, for many men, sex is not only about passion or bonding. It can also serve as a powerful form of release, a way to escape from the pressures of life. Daily responsibilities, financial worries, work demands, family obligations. All of these weigh heavily on a man's shoulders. And because many men are taught to suppress emotions rather than express them, stress often has no clear outlet. For some, intimacy becomes that outlet, a space where the noise of the world fades and only closeness remains. In those moments, sex provides more than physical pleasure. It provides relief. It's as though the weight of unspoken frustrations, silent struggles, and bottled-up anxieties temporarily dissolves. Intimacy becomes not just about desire, but about refuge, about stepping away from the constant pressure of being strong, being dependable, being in control. For a man, those minutes of connection can feel like a pause button on life, a place where he doesn't have to perform or compete, but simply exist in closeness. This is why some men pursue sex during times of high stress, not necessarily because of heightened desire, but because it offers them a form of therapy without words. Unlike conversations that require vulnerability or explanations, sex offers instant comfort, an escape that bypasses language and dives directly into feeling. And while this may not always be understood on the surface, for the man, it becomes a way of saying, I need to feel safe. I need to feel released. I need to forget, even if just for a moment. But here lies the complexity. When sex is used primarily as an escape, it may sometimes mask deeper issues. The man may appear satisfied, yet underneath, the root problems remain untouched. Still, the act itself provides him with a momentary shield, a chance to breathe, a reminder that life's difficulties can be set aside, if only briefly, and in many cases, that temporary relief is enough to restore him, enough to give him the strength to face the world again, enough to help him believe that he can carry on. Yet, while sex as stress relief may seem purely physical, it often still ties back into emotional need. Because what he is truly seeking is not just pleasure, It is comfort, not just release, it is peace. And sometimes, without ever saying it aloud, sex becomes his silent way of reaching for that peace, his quiet method of telling his partner, "I'm carrying more than I can show, but here, with you, I can let go." And as this pattern unfolds, it reveals something deeper, that for many men, even in the midst of using intimacy as an escape, the act itself continues to carry layers of meaning, layers that point not just to what he is running from, but also to what he is reaching for. And that reaching, for many men, intimacy does more than create closeness. It awakens a deep sense of bonding, and with it an instinct to protect. In those vulnerable moments when barriers fall and a man shares himself fully, something shifts inside him. The act of intimacy is not just about what he receives, it's also about what he gives. And in giving himself, he feels tied, connected, bound in a way that stirs loyalty and responsibility. This bond often triggers a powerful protective instinct. It is as though intimacy solidifies his sense of belonging, and with belonging comes the urge to safeguard. The closeness he feels does not end when the physical moment is over, it lingers, shaping how he looks at his partner, how he cares, how he prioritizes. He begins to feel not just passion, but guardianship, a need to stand between his partner and the world, to ensure that the person he is bonded with is secure, emotionally and physically. The science of attachment even supports this. Men release oxytocin during intimacy, the same hormone that fosters bonding between parents and children, or friends who trust one another. That chemical shift doesn't just spark desire, it strengthens emotional connection. And with that connection comes the natural inclination to protect. For many men, the more intimacy they share, the deeper this bond becomes, and the stronger their drive to provide safety, stability, and loyalty. But it's not only biology, it's also psychology. Intimacy often reveals sides of a man he rarely shows to the world. In those moments, he is not the worker, the leader, the decision maker. He is simply himself, vulnerable and unguarded. And because he has entrusted that side of himself to another person, he feels a duty to defend and cherish that bond. He sees intimacy not only as pleasure but as proof of trust, and with that proof comes the weight of responsibility. If you trust me enough to give me this closeness, I must honor it, I must protect it. And so intimacy weaves together desire, connection, and responsibility into one fabric. It deepens his attachment, strengthens his loyalty, and calls forth a side of him that feels compelled to shield what he values most. Which is why, for many men, after intimacy, you may notice subtle changes. He may hold you tighter, act more attentive, or even carry himself differently. Because in his mind, that bond is no longer casual, no longer light. It is something he feels accountable for, something he feels bound to protect. And this protective instinct awakened by intimacy often grows stronger with time, with repetition, with deepening trust. The more a man bonds in this way, the more fiercely he wants to hold on, to secure, to defend. Because intimacy is not just a release for him. It is a tether that ties him to someone in a way that words cannot fully explain, yet actions always reveal. And that tether, rejection or the absence of intimacy, touches men in ways that are often invisible on the surface, but deeply felt within. Many men are taught from a young age to suppress their emotions, to remain composed, to never show how much something hurts them. And because of this conditioning, when intimacy is withheld or when rejection occurs, they may not outwardly react, but inwardly it can strike at the very core of their self-worth. For a man, intimacy is not only about pleasure. It is a form of affirmation, a silent acknowledgement that he is desired, valued, and accepted. When that affirmation is missing, the silence speaks louder than words. He may begin to interpret the absence of intimacy not as circumstantial, but as personal. He wonders if he is no longer attractive, no longer enough, no longer wanted. And though he may not say these thoughts aloud, they weigh heavily on his spirit. Rejection in this area often feels different than rejection in any other part of life. If a man is turned down at work, he may try again. If he fails at a task, he may work harder. But when he feels rejected in intimacy, it cuts much deeper, because it touches a part of him that is both vulnerable and sacred. It is not only about desire, it is about identity, about his place in the relationship, about whether he still holds significance in the heart of the one he loved. This is why repeated rejection can create distance. It may not always be intentional, but the man begins to retreat, to close off, to guard himself. He fears putting himself forward again, because intimacy is not just physical, it's exposing. To reach out is to risk hearing no, and to hear no repeatedly is to feel unwanted, even unloved. And so slowly he may stop reaching, not because he doesn't crave connection, but because the pain of rejection feels heavier than the absence of intimacy itself. Yet, it's not only rejection that leaves its mark. The lack of intimacy can be just as impactful. Over time, emotional disconnection grows where physical closeness is absent. A man may continue to show up, to provide, to function in the relationship, but inside he feels a void. That void is not simply sexual. It is emotional, because sex for him is often the bridge that assures him of his place, his acceptance, his value. Without it, he begins to question, to doubt, to silently wonder what changed. And so, rejection and absence are not small matters for men. They are deeply tied to how they see themselves and their relationship. And even though he may not always voice it, the weight of it is carried in his silence, his distance, his withdrawal. Because behind that quiet exterior, behind the composed mask, he is often wrestling with questions he cannot easily put into words. Am I still wanted? Do I still matter? Am I still enough? And those unspoken questions. One of the quiet truths about men is that they often struggle to communicate their emotional needs when it comes to sex. While intimacy holds layers of meaning for them, validation, connection, reassurance, they may not always have the words or even the courage to say what they truly feel. Society has long conditioned men to be stoic, to suppress vulnerability, to avoid admitting need. And so, when it comes to sex, many carry their unspoken emotions silently, hoping their actions will speak louder than their words. Instead of saying, I need to feel wanted, a man may initiate intimacy, letting his touch be the question his lips will not ask. Instead of confessing, I feel insecure, he may seek closeness, using sex as a way to cover the doubts he cannot admit. To the outside, it may appear as pure desire, but beneath it lies an unspoken plea. Show me that I still matter. Show me that I'm still enough. The difficulty lies in the fact that many men fear being misunderstood. If they admit that sex carries emotional weight for them, they worry it will be seen as weakness or neediness. And so, they bury the words, replacing them with gestures, hoping the message is understood without ever being spoken. Yet this silence often creates a gap, because what they feel internally is rarely explained externally. This is why miscommunication in intimacy is so common. A partner may interpret a man's physical advances as purely sexual, when in reality, they are deeply emotional. They may see it as lust, when it is actually longing. They may view it as routine, when it is, in fact, his quiet way of reaching for comfort, security, and connection. And because he does not always explain it, the meaning can be lost, leaving him with the feeling that his emotional needs remain unseen. The irony is that men are often the ones who crave affirmation most deeply in intimacy, but they are also the least likely to voice it. This creates a paradox. His silence hides the very thing he needs most, and his inability to articulate those needs sometimes leaves him feeling misunderstood, even invisible. So he continues forward, carrying those needs like unspoken weight, channeling them into the act of sex itself, hoping that the physical closeness will say what his words cannot. And this unspoken dynamic, his silence, his hidden emotional needs, his reliance on intimacy as communication, becomes one of the most important yet overlooked truths about how men view sex. Because beneath the surface, beneath the physical, beneath the desire itself, lies something quieter, something softer, something he rarely admits aloud but always carries within him. And that silence. When it comes to intimacy, one of the most striking distinctions in how men experience it lies in the difference between casual sex and committed sex. On the surface, both may look the same, two people coming together in a moment of desire. But beneath the surface, the meaning, the weight, and the impact are often profoundly different. For many men, casual sex can be driven by physical attraction, curiosity, or the simple need for release. It is more about the moment than the meaning. The connection is shallow, temporary, and limited to the body. In these situations, intimacy is often separated from emotion. It becomes an activity, an escape, a pursuit of pleasure without the expectation of depth. And while it can satisfy physical urges, it rarely nourishes the deeper emotional needs that so many men carry quietly within them. Committed sex, however, is something else entirely. In a committed bond, intimacy carries layers of meaning that casual encounters cannot replicate. It is not just about the act. It is about the connection, the trust, the continuity. A man may find pleasure in casual intimacy, but he finds grounding in committed intimacy, because in that space the act becomes more than physical. It becomes affirmation, reassurance, and loyalty all woven together. The difference often lies in what lingers after. Casual sex tends to fade with the moment. It ends when it ends. But committed sex stays with him. It strengthens his sense of belonging, his attachment, his loyalty to the one he shares it with. It doesn't just give him satisfaction, it gives him stability. And in that stability, he finds confidence, peace, and a deeper sense of identity. This is why, for many men, casual sex may feel exciting but ultimately empty. It scratches an itch but leaves a void untouched. Whereas committed sex, even if less frequent, carries a weight that endures. It is not about how many times it happens, it's about what it means each time it does. Because in a relationship, intimacy is not just about bodies. It is about history, about trust, about the unspoken bond that grows stronger every time closeness is shared. And so, while some men may separate sex from emotion in casual situations, most find that within commitment, the two cannot be divided. The act becomes inseparable from the meaning, and the meaning becomes inseparable from the bond. Which is why the sex he shares with someone he loves will always feel different from the sex he shares without attachment. Because one satisfies the body, but the other feeds the soul. And as that distinction deepens, it shapes how he views intimacy altogether, how he gives himself, how he commits, how he. For many men, sex is not only a physical act or even just an expression of desire. It is a mirror that reflects loyalty and trust. When he chooses to share himself intimately with someone, he is not simply giving away his body. He is entrusting a vulnerable part of himself, and in return, he quietly equates that bond with commitment. To him, sexual connection is not just about pleasure. It is about assurance. I am yours and you are mine. Trust plays a central role in this view. Intimacy requires a man to lower his guard, to let go of the shields he wears in the outside world, and to show a side of himself that is unfiltered and exposed. To allow another person into that space takes courage, and once he grants it, he often sees it as sacred. That is why many men interpret sexual exclusivity as proof of loyalty. If he is giving himself in that way, he sees it as both a gift and a vow, and he quietly expects the same in return. This is also why betrayal in this area cuts so deeply. When a man equates sex with loyalty, the breaking of that trust feels like more than infidelity. It feels like the unraveling of everything intimacy represents. It's not just about the act itself. It's about the breach of sacred trust, the violation of something he thought was safe. Because for him, sex was not casual. It was a bond, a commitment, a silent agreement of fidelity. Even beyond betrayal, trust defines how fully he can give himself. If he doubts loyalty, his intimacy may be guarded, restrained, lacking in depth. But when he feels secure, when trust is unwavering, he is able to surrender more freely, to open himself completely, to let the experience carry its full weight. For many men, this is the difference between going through the motions and truly connecting. The assurance that his trust is not misplaced. And this is why, in his heart, sexual connection often becomes a kind of proof. Proof that love is mutual, proof that loyalty is intact, proof that trust is alive. It is not just the body he seeks. It is the reassurance that his place is secure, that the bond is unbroken, that the promise is still alive. And so, when intimacy is given freely with faithfulness and devotion, it deepens his loyalty in return, binding him closer, reinforcing his commitment, fueling his desire to protect what he values most. Because to him, sex without trust feels incomplete, almost hollow. But sex within loyalty and trust feels whole, feels grounding, feels binding, and the more this belief takes root, the more intimacy becomes not just an act of connection, but an act of devotion. A devotion that shapes how he views the relationship, how he invests in it, how he defines love itself, and within that devotion. When it comes to intimacy, many people focus on the physical act itself, but for men, the meaning often lies in the subtle language of touch. Every caress, every embrace, every movement can carry unspoken emotions that words cannot always capture. Men, who are often less vocal about their feelings, use physical touch as a way of saying what they struggle to put into sentences. A hand lingering a little longer, a kiss held a little deeper, the way he pulls someone closer, all of it is communication, all of it is expression, all of it is emotion translated into action. Physical touch during sex becomes his unspoken dialogue. When he holds tightly, it can mean, "Don't let go of me." When he slows down, it can mean, "I want to savor this closeness." When his touch is tender, it speaks of love. When it is passionate, it speaks of longing. Each gesture reveals a layer of what he feels but may not say. And for him, this is not just about pleasure. It is about connection, about finding a way to express vulnerability without needing words. This is why intimacy can feel so powerful for men. It bypasses the barriers of language and pride. In everyday life, he may struggle to confess fear, to admit insecurity, to show softness, but in moments of intimacy, those walls fall. His hands, his embrace, his movements, they tell the story his voice leaves unspoken. It is not always about what he does physically. It is about what those actions mean emotionally. For many men, this makes sex more than an act. It makes it a form of conversation. A conversation where silence is not empty but full, where words are replaced by presence, where meaning is carried not by language but by the body itself. In that silence, he feels understood, and in that touch, he hopes to be understood in return. And so, physical touch becomes the medium of intimacy. It is how he says, "I love you," without speaking, how he says, "I need you," without asking, how he says, "You matter to me," without explanation. These unspoken messages can be the most honest reflections of his heart, because in those moments he is stripped of pretense, stripped of performance, left only with the truth of what he feels. Which is why the way he touches, and the way his touch is received, shapes his experience of intimacy more than most realize. When his touch is welcomed, responded to, cherished, he feels not only connected but affirmed. But when his touch is ignored, rejected, or seen as meaningless, It leaves him silent in a different way, a silence not of peace but of distance, because for him, physical touch is not casual, it is language. And the words he speaks through his body. One of the truths often overlooked about men is that beneath confidence, beneath strength, beneath the appearance of being in control, many quietly wrestle with a need for reassurance. And for them, sex often becomes one of the most powerful ways of receiving that reassurance, not of skill or dominance, but of being wanted. Because to a man, being desired is not only about attraction, it is about validation of his worth, his presence, his place in the heart of another. When intimacy happens, he does not only feel physical closeness, he feels chosen, he feels seen. He feels affirmed that he is not just tolerated but desired, not just accepted but longed for. And this touches something deep inside of him, something that words alone cannot always soothe. In everyday life, he may doubt whether he is enough, whether he is attractive, whether he is valued beyond what he provides. But in moments of intimacy, when his partner reaches for him, when desire is directed toward him, those doubts begin to quiet. For many men, sex is not just about pleasure. It is about proof. Proof that he still matters, that he is still wanted, that the spark is still alive. It tells him, I am still attractive in your eyes, I still excite you, I still hold a place in your heart. That reassurance is not shallow. It is deeply psychological, deeply emotional, deeply tied to how he views himself within the relationship. This is why rejection in intimacy can wound him more than he admits. It is not always about being denied pleasure. It is about feeling unwanted. To him, that silence, that distance, that turning away whispers, you are no longer desired. And while he may not voice it, it can echo inside of him, affecting his confidence, his self-image, even his behavior outside the bedroom. On the other hand, when he feels pursued, when he feels desired, when intimacy is not only his initiation but is reciprocated with enthusiasm, something shifts inside him. He stands taller, he feels more secure. He becomes more expressive, more confident, more devoted. Because sex for him becomes more than a physical act. It becomes a reminder that he is still wanted, still needed, still cherished. And so, for many men, sex is not just connection. It is affirmation. It reassures him that love is alive, that attraction remains, that he has not been forgotten in the tide of responsibilities and routines. It becomes the quiet answer to unspoken questions he carries. Am I enough? Do I still matter? Do you still see me the way you once did? Every time intimacy answers those questions with a yes, his loyalty deepens, his confidence strengthens, his heart settles. And as this reassurance grows, it shapes not only how he sees sex, but how he sees himself, how he moves in the relationship, how he gives, how he. For many men, sex is not just an isolated act. It is a mirror, a reflection, a silent measurement of the state of the relationship itself. While arguments, routines, and daily pressures may fill the surface of life, intimacy often tells him the truth about what lies beneath. If the connection is alive, if the affection is present, if trust remains strong, it often shows itself in the way intimacy flows. And if tension, distance, or neglect has taken root, it quietly reveals itself there as well. This is why men so often equate the health of the relationship with the quality of intimacy. To him, sex is not only about desire, it is about closeness, harmony, partnership. When intimacy is vibrant, frequent, and mutual, he reads it as a sign that love is strong, that the bond is safe, that both hearts are still invested. But when intimacy fades, when touch grows rare, when passion turns to silence, he does not simply see it as a change in routine. He feels it as a warning, a sign that something deeper may be drifting. It is not that men believe sex alone defines a relationship, but rather that they see it as a barometer. The same way laughter signals joy, or arguments reveal friction, intimacy speaks of connection. For him, it becomes a pulse he quietly checks, often without words. If that pulse is steady, he feels reassured. If it is weak, he feels unsettled. And if it stops altogether, he may interpret it not as a pause in passion, but as a fracture in the bond itself. This is also why intimacy carries so much emotional weight for him. It is not just an event, it is evidence. Evidence that love is alive. Evidence that the relationship still breathes. Evidence that he is not just a partner in duty, but a partner in desire. And when that evidence is strong, he feels secure. But when it weakens, doubt creeps in. Even if everything else in the relationship seems outwardly fine. For many men, this creates a cycle. When the relationship feels healthy, he desires more intimacy, and when intimacy is present, he feels the relationship is healthier still. But when intimacy diminishes, he may begin to withdraw, not because he no longer cares, but because he no longer feels the bond reflected back to him. And in that space, misunderstandings grow, silences lengthen, and what could have been a simple conversation about connection becomes a quiet distance that neither fully addresses. So, in truth, when a man looks at sex, he often sees more than desire. He sees partnership, he sees loyalty, he sees affirmation. He sees the heartbeat of the relationship itself. And to him, keeping that heartbeat alive is not just about pleasure. It is about trust, about stability, about knowing that the bond he has given himself to still has life, still has warmth, still has strength. And as he views intimacy through this lens, it shapes not only how he gives himself in private moments, but also how he behaves outside of them. How he commits, how he invests, how he loves, how he... Beyond all the ways men tie sex to love, to reassurance, to validation, there is yet another layer, often hidden beneath the surface: sex as communication. For many men, words do not come easily. They may struggle to express vulnerability, to articulate feelings, to open up about insecurities. But in intimacy, they find a language that requires no sentences. Every touch becomes a sentence, every kiss a paragraph, every moment of closeness a story that says what his mouth cannot. In this space, he feels safe to reveal what he otherwise keeps locked away. The gentleness of his hands may speak of tenderness he cannot phrase. The intensity of his passion may reflect an urgency he cannot voice. The way he holds, the way he lingers, the way he looks into your eyes. All of these become unspoken confessions. To him, sex is not just about release. It is about being understood without explanation, being heard without sound, being accepted without condition. And because of this, the quality of intimacy often mirrors the quality of communication in the relationship. When he feels shut down, unheard, or dismissed in daily life, his silence may spill over into intimacy. But when he feels welcomed, listened to, respected, he communicates back through closeness, through effort, through presence. To him, intimacy is not simply physical. It is dialogue, a backhand, forth exchange, a rhythm of giving and receiving that says, "This is how I feel, this is where I am, this is what you mean to me." In many ways, sex becomes a bridge, one that carries him across the gap between what he feels and what he struggles to say. It is not always about proving masculinity or feeding desire. Sometimes it is about whispering fears he cannot admit, showing gratitude he cannot phrase, or expressing devotion that feels too heavy for words. And in this silent language, he finds both release and relief. But when this channel of communication is closed, when intimacy becomes mechanical or absent, he often feels muted. He carries emotions inside that never find expression, burdens that remain unshared, tenderness that never reaches its destination. And so he begins to retreat, not because he lacks desire, but because he has lost his language, his outlet, his way of being understood without judgment. This is why, for many men, sex is not merely passion. It is a lifeline. It is the way he stays connected not just to his partner but to himself. It is the place where his emotions are translated, where his heart finds its voice, where his inner world touches the outer one. And when this lifeline is alive, he feels whole, balanced, steady. But when it frays, when silence replaces closeness, he feels unseen, unheard, unknown. And in that quiet, the distance grows until what once was a conversation of bodies becomes. For many men, sex is also tied to memory and imprinting. It is not just about the present moment, but about the way those moments linger, shaping how he remembers you, how he feels about himself, how he defines the bond. Every intimate experience leaves behind an emotional footprint, whether small or large, whether conscious or unconscious. And for him, those memories are not easily erased. They stay with him, shaping how he interprets closeness, how he views trust, how he recalls affection. If the experience of intimacy is nurturing, safe, passionate, and full of warmth, it imprints deeply as a memory of love fulfilled. He carries it with him long after the moment has passed, replaying it in his mind, using it as proof that the relationship is alive, that he is desired, that the bond is worth holding on to. But if the experience is cold, disconnected, rushed, or tinged with rejection, that memory too can linger, leaving him questioning, doubting, even silently pulling back, because what imprints on him emotionally cannot simply be undone by logic. This is why intimacy for a man often feels like more than a night. It feels like history being written. Each moment adds another layer to the story of the relationship. Every touch tells him whether you see him. Every kiss tells him whether you still choose him. Every embrace tells him whether he is safe in your heart. And because men often hold on to these imprints without openly speaking of them, they may begin to build silent narratives. She wants me, or she doesn't want me, she still feels close, or she's drifting away, all based on how those intimate memories are left behind. It is also why passion is so deeply powerful for him. When the intimacy is alive with energy, with presence, with depth, he does not just feel physical satisfaction. He feels remembered. He feels that the moment will stay with both of you as a shared piece of history. And when intimacy fades into routine or absence, he feels that too, that the memories are drying up, that what once defined closeness is slipping, that the story is losing its warmth. So, to a man, sex is not just about what happens in the moment. It is about what remains afterward. It is the way he will look back weeks, months, even years later, and still recall how he was touched, how he was wanted, how he was seen. And this memory, this imprint, becomes the silent foundation upon which he either builds greater closeness or withdraws into distance. And as these memories accumulate, shaping the lens through which he views both himself and the relationship, he begins to. And so when we ask the question, how do men view sex with you? We discover that it is never just about the body. It is about identity, respect, trust, admiration, memory, communication, and love. For many men, sex is the place where they feel most vulnerable yet most powerful, most silent yet most heard, most ordinary yet most alive. It is not simply an act, it is a mirror that reflects how he sees himself in your eyes, how he feels in your presence, how he believes the bond between you is growing or fading. When intimacy is shallow, he feels forgotten. When intimacy is cold, he feels rejected. But when intimacy is alive with passion, with care, with respect, with admiration, he feels chosen, he feels remembered, he feels whole. So understand this. To him, sex is not just sex. It is a love letter written without ink, a conversation spoken without words, a memory engraved without time. And how he views it with you will always reflect how deeply he feels connected to you. not just in body, but in soul. Because in the end, sex is not only what happens in the night. It is what lingers in the morning, what echoes in the heart, what shapes the story that two people continue to write together. And when a man views sex with you as sacred, as safe, as cherished, then you are not just his desire. You are his refuge, his anchor, his proof that love is alive.